All right, let's talk to Ryan now. Ryan, you're on the air with Mike Fabarez. How can I help?
Hello, Mike. How are you?
Good.
I was going to ask you about idolatry, specifically Leviticus 26:1. I appreciate art. I'm a newer Christian, and I noticed some of my Christian friends have either paintings or statues of Christ, and I do have a replica of Christ the Redeemer statue on my patio from Brazil, the replica, and I realized I don't know, I don't pray to it, but I like having those things around, and I wonder if that is the wrong comfort to have, like in that graven image. Like, is that idolatry, or to appreciate it for art? I don't know. This may be a stupid question.
No, it's not a stupid question. Matter of fact, it's still a debated question. There are some in the great tradition of the Puritans, and I'll call it a great tradition because there's so many great things about it that I'm all for. But when you have what we would call an iconoclastic view, which just meant that after the Reformation, there was this sense of taking down all the idols, and the idols they saw as any statue that was made, and they would quote Leviticus 26 and Exodus chapter 20, and they don't want you kissing the ivory feet, or the marbled feet of Mary or Joseph, or some statue of Jesus. So they didn't want a crucifix with Christ hanging on the cross. So they purified the church, thus the name, and they said, we're not going to have any of that simplistic worship. They even started to say, take all the instruments out, because in the high church, of course, certainly in Roman Catholicism, go back to Beethoven and Bach, we had pipe organs and orchestras and all kinds of instruments, and now it was like, nope, we're just going to sing a cappella. And you saw this pendulum swing back. And I guess the latest of this might be J.I. Packer in a book that was a best-selling, medallion-winning book, Knowing God. It's a great book, but he will say, I don't want any picture of Jesus. I don't want any representation of Jesus. So they'd go to your church if a bunch of J.I. Packers would say, hey, your cutouts for the kids, flannel graph stories, if they still do that, or whatever, the things on the screen trying to teach your kids what Jesus did, you cannot have an image of Christ. And I'm going to say, I don't think that's the context of any of what we're reading regarding making these images, right? We remember Moses got horribly angry when the golden calf was there and they were bowing down to it and they were worshiping. He said, you're not going to do that. God does not need some kind of image to worship him. And they would even argue, and if you go into the Semitic ancient Near East, the way that this is probably understood as that the calf was the burdened beast that would carry the deity of Yahweh. And they would say, well, we're really not worshiping, the calf, although he's engaged in all of that was rightly understood as let's get rid of these images in our worship. But if you look at what's really being said, right, in Exodus chapter 20, it's a lot like the whole discussion of the tattoos, right, tattooing and cutting yourself for the dead. Well, you got to get the context of that. You want to put a verse on your arm, whatever, you can, but you can't take it off easily. You're free to do it. And even in Exodus 20, when the Ten Commandments are first recorded here, it talks about no likeness that is on earth, right? Anything on the earth or anything under the earth. The idea of having an image is really in the context of you're not supposed to have any other God before me. You're not supposed to make a carved image or any likeness of something. And then all of a sudden, God creates a worship center, and he has these angels over the box where he's going to manifest his glory. And therefore, and I think you could catch a fish and you could hang it in your study or in your man cave, and you probably wouldn't think twice about it. Well, that's an image of something that swims under the sea. And it's like under the water. That's specific in Genesis 20. Well, you're not worshiping the fish on the wall. And your kids in Sunday school at your church are not worshiping the video that talks about Jesus walking through Galilee and calling the disciples to leave their nets and follow him. Here's my argument for the fact that I don't think you should be offended in your conscience about a image of Christ. And that is, if it's not used in worship, I'm going to say the image of Christ, God himself put Christ in an image, right? I mean, God took the Son and gave him a visible image. And therefore, right, all the embodiment of Christ, I'm thinking he is himself infleshed and encased in flesh. He still is. And we will worship him one day, and he will be in flesh. I'm not worshiping our representations of Christ. But if I have a video for my kids, right, I'm gonna be fine with that. And I sit here in an office. I have no depictions of Jesus. Well, I take that back. I'm looking at a Rembrandt right over my computer screen. I guess I do. I have him on the storm with the apostles on a piece of canvas, right? It's not the original. The original was stolen and is lost, and they don't know where it is. So I don't have the original. Don't send the FBI to my office. But here I have the Rembrandt of Jesus on Galilee in the storm. It's a great picture. It encourages me to keep going when the times are tough. I don't worship that picture, but I'm encouraged by the picture. I guess I do. But I'm thinking, I don't have the picture like my grandpa did in his living room of a oil painting of Jesus by the the Renaissance painters. But my grandpa never worshipped that. But it's okay, right? I'm not going to be surrounded by a bunch of images of Christ. I think of Christ as embodied in heaven at the right hand of the Father, and my worship goes to him. But the reality is that when I'm teaching as a didactic effort, especially with children, or even in my own study as I look up, I guess I do. I have something to motivate me that reminds me of the earthly incarnate Christ, right? I don't think anyone should have a problem with that. Now, J.I. Packer notwithstanding, right? He's kind of a throwback. He was a professor of the Puritans, so he bought a lot of that. And in a very true sense, I'm an iconoclast at heart, as I often say to my colleagues. I don't like a lot of stuff that is somehow associated with worship. I want it to be clean. I don't want Christ on a cross. I'm not even big on crosses. I don't even like you wearing a cross around your neck necessarily, but I'm not going to tell someone they can't. I'm all about trying to think in our own minds about Christ being crucified by our words. When Paul spoke to the Galatians, right, Christ wasn't crucified in Galatia, but he said before whose eyes Christ was crucified in his preaching. That was the point. He was giving them words. When people say, we don't even have a cross on your pulpit or behind your pulpit, I'm going to say, yeah, but you better hear it preached here every week. And you do. And therefore, I don't need the image, but I'm not opposed to the image. So I kind of have a little bit of the, I have a affinity to the Puritans' view on this, and I get it. Because I do know if I go to Rome, which I've been to the Vatican, I've been to the Middle East several times, I know there's a lot of stumbling over images, and I don't like it. And I don't want our worship to be associated with images. But I don't think it's wrong for you or I to have in our office or our study or in our living room some kind of depiction, a woodcut or a canvas oil painting or whatever it is that depicts Christ. As long as it's communicating to us, not here, come here and worship this image, but hey, this is the reminder of the incarnate Christ. A book I would recommend to you, which goes into a lot of what, and it's a short book and an easy read, but Francis Schaeffer wrote a book called Art in the Bible, I think is what the title is. It's a great read. I just reread it recently, and I just thought it's so good for us to remember, even as I read in my daily Bible reading not long ago, that the things that were done in the tabernacle were done for glory and for beauty. And it even depicted angelic beings. And all of that was for glory and for beauty. I love art. I like art. I tried to mess around in art as a kid, and I respect good art, and I think we should not be shying away from art that depicts biblical scenes or biblical characters or even the mainstay of what our biblical theology is based on, or the person of Christ. But you can go too far, and you can see the woman, you might visit some old lady in the church, and she's got 18 images of Christ around her, and she thinks that there's something to it. They become an amulet for her or a good luck charm for her. And if you're trusting in the image, you've gone too far. And if you can't handle that, you're going to be trusting in an image, well, then don't put any around you. But you and I trust, we're not trusting in any images. Does that help?
It does. Thank you. I'm going to get that book, The Art in the Bible. I found it online. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good read, and it's a short read. You can read it, couple sittings, no problem. And Schaeffer makes the case, and it's a good one. And there was a critical concern series book, too, and it's a lot, Schaeffer's just right to the point, and I love the way he thinks in this book. But there was a critical concern book by Mount Loma Press that came out years ago in the 80s or 90s about art and Christianity. And, that's a generally good topic. I know Moody Publications has put out a couple books recently on art and Christianity. Those are helpful, and it's good, but I think Schaeffer is going to stay right within the biblical lines without any kind of flirting with, we all should listen to Bob Dylan or whatever. So, yeah, I hope that helps. Okay, thanks, Ryan.
It did. Thank you, Mike.
Okay, all right.